This is an issue that's cropping up in Palestine. It leads to increasing conflict, right? So there's kind of a burgeoning discussion right now in Palestine about where the water is coming from. Who gets water? Does Gaza get enough water? Does the West Bank get enough water from Israel? Is Israel taking water from Syria and Jordan from the Jordan River? So these are already issues that are on the burner. You know, they're starting to simmer, and it may boil over pretty soon here. Can you think of some issues here in Kuwait or the Gulf that might be scarce? Some resources? Like what?
The drains and the
Drains?
water. Yeah. I don't know how to say it, but in the sea they throw everything.
Okay, so maybe you're worried more about the scarcity of clean marine water, life, yeah? That's an issue, yeah. There was a sewage outlet going on in the sea level for a couple of years. Anything else?
The air.
Air,
Recently,
okay.
the incident of the tires.
Oh, you heard about the tires burning in Jaffa
Yeah.
about 4 or 5 days ago? Okay.
Yeah.
So how does that affect scarcity? Does that make the air
Pollution.
better or worse?
Worse.
Worse. Okay. So you see, even though you haven't studied environment formally, you have an intuitive sense that there is something wrong with burning, tens of thousands of rubber tires in the middle of the desert, right? That's something, you see the smoke, you can smell it, you can feel it in your face. Of course, these are not so-called natural events, right? So they need to be monitored, hopefully prevented in the future. Sustainable development is a term that you hear thrown around a lot in IR as well. And basically that means economic growth that does not deplete the resources that we need to actually keep growth going, right? So it's basically become kind of a buzz term in a lot of different disciplines, but essentially it means that we can still have growth, we can still have economic growth, building houses and building up our economies, but also maintaining a certain amount of respect and conservation for the natural resources we have, right? Because some of them are finite, and we need to make sure that we protect them for future use. So, we're talking a lot about global climate change and that issue. Basically, this is an issue that comes out of several human productions of chemicals, one of which is, of course, from cars, right? We're all driving around by ourselves in a car, and when you see the amount of smog produced from cars, I always think of Los Angeles because I used to live there, but there's basically also smog here in Kuwait. If you go up to Failaka Island, you can see a little ring of smog. Again, smog is basically like a haze or a small band of pollution that's kind of brown in color. You can see that from Failaka Island over Kuwait. Have you all seen that here? I think someone here has, yeah. So that's something to, and if you take an airplane outside Kuwait, you also see this smog. So in Kuwait, it's coming a lot from the refineries, right, that are in Ahmadi down south. Those refineries, of course, are just burning out. There's not, we usually see some type of ducts that help to minimize the amount of pollution, but in Kuwait, they're just basically spraying out just like that. So those releases in hydrocarbons and methane, nitrous oxide are all coming together and basically creating smog, which is just sitting there for all practical purposes, and unfortunately will not go away until the source of pollution is either seriously stopped or changed. Okay, so another major source of carbon dioxide production are power plants. In Kuwait, of course, the major source of power is coming from the Doha plant, right? In Doha, you have what producing electricity? Do you guys know? Oil, folks. Oil, right? So you guys are just pumping, the Kuwait government is just pumping oil from the refineries into the power plant in Doha. And even though it's a very inefficient way of producing electricity, it's the main source of electricity for Kuwait. Now, a lot of other countries use different sources. Of course, we talked about nuclear earlier. Nuclear is used a lot in Europe and a lot in the States, Japan, although that might change now. But we also see production of electricity from coal. Coal is a type of hydrocarbon from the ground, right? That's basically dug up and burned like bricks. We also see use of solar, right? Solar, that would be excellent use in Kuwait given the amount of light here. And also we see wind as a major production source of electricity. Now that's highly utilized in Germany, Denmark, and I see it starting in Scotland. A little bit in the United States, but not quite. So there is a small shift towards renewable resources and renewable energy, right? Yeah. Hydroelectricity, I mean, I think that would be difficult in Kuwait. What I think would be possible, because she's referring to hydro, basically dams, right? So when we have these dams that are built up against a water source, and then essentially the turbines are turning, turbines inside the generators, from the water moving down, cascading down the dams, right? That's used very frequently in the United States and parts of Europe. But I think it's, I don't know, is it used much in Russia or the former Soviet Union? I guess it might be, huh? Yeah. So, but of course here in Kuwait we don't have those type of dams, but you would see tides here that are quite strong. So tidal power is also a very small, in terms of percentage of use, but very small but very powerful way to produce power. So given the tides in Kuwait range from between 5 to 1 meters, I think this would be an excellent possibility if there was the right application. Yeah.
We don't have in Kuwait a natural resources so we can have electricity or anything else. So we just have oil and other things.
Do you guys agree with her? What did you have here in the summer?
Sun,
right? This is very, very prime location for solar.
Yeah.
Now the problem with solar, and you can talk to Lamia Hayat at KU, she's an excellent resource about this, but my discussions with Lamia Hayat, who's a scientist there, she was explaining to me that the reason solar has not been used in Kuwait today is because the solar technology does not work well in Kuwait, because it's almost too hot here, right? It almost burns out the solar panels too fast, so you have to constantly replace them. So the Kuwait government, Qatar government, Emirati governments are working together actually on a few collaborative issues here where they're working together on helping to produce a solar panel that works for the region. Okay? So that means one of the issues with solar panels, even in regions where it's not so hot, is you have to maintain them. Right? So there's a certain amount of infrastructure issues. In here in Kuwait, that's particularly a problem with the dust, because the dust is everywhere, right? It's constantly, it covers the panels, who's going to go out and clean the panels, you can see there's already an issue there. So they're trying to develop a solar panel that, from my understanding, basically keeps itself clean and can survive the extreme heat here in Kuwait. The technology inside can actually survive that heat, such that it produces power efficiently and effectively for a long-term period. Right? So again, this would be, from an outsider's perspective, this would be probably the best source of energy for Kuwait once oil runs out. And unfortunately, we're going to talk about oil running out here. So oil will probably run out in Kuwait between 30 to 40, well, start to run out in 30 to 40 years. So that's going to be a big issue. We just talked about coal.
30 to 40 years. Let me take.
I'm going to skip through some of this stuff because we've talked about it basically here. So the book's talking a lot about biodiversity, deforestation, all these issues having to do with basically farming, how we're kind of mismanaging or not zoning properly our land use, right? So if you're thinking about a place like Brazil, which has massive amounts of rainforests, and those rainforests are being what we call slashed and burned. Essentially, they're being cut and then set on fire to get rid of them. The effects are that you're turning a tropical rainforest, which a lot of people refer to as the lungs of the planet, right? Because essentially the tropical rainforest is providing significant amounts of oxygen for humans and for animals, flora and fauna alike. But when you start destroying it at such massive levels and not replacing it, then you're going to run into problems with having enough oxygen in the atmosphere, right, for both human and animal life. So this is a major, major issue. It's not just affecting Brazil, of course. It's affecting every country that's practicing slash and burn or, deforestation. In the United States, we do a lot of, and Canada, we do a lot of timber. So we're basically cutting down trees and not always replacing them. Now they're trying to, but they weren't always replacing them. And when you don't do that, then you're basically leaving forests as fields, right? Well, the ecosystem between a forest and a field is very different. Forest, has what we call a canopy, basically cover. A field doesn't, right? It's just exposed. Forest has a certain amount of vegetation that's very dense. A field is mostly grass, right? So they're very different ecosystems. I don't have time to really explain ecosystems, but hopefully if you're interested more, you'll take Environmental Studies 101 next fall, which we're offering in social science, the social science division. We can talk more about the differences between different ecosystems and how, slash and burn really does affect human and animal health. So here's just a quick map from the book that shows you, where we've lost forests and how it's changing quickly in the deserts. You can see most of it looks like it's in Africa, like I said, Brazil, parts of the western United States. Looks like Iran and Iraq are